And looks like we're on, huh?
Looks like we're live.
So I'll wait for the feed to come up and I'll set it up, but I think we're live on Facebook. So welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Everyone to our Up Close, where I interview someone somewhere about improv. And this week we're very excited. I'm excited because we have Cheryl Platz, who's actually a UP ensemble member. And sorry, I'm just lining up the chat so that I can see it here. And teacher, and again, longtime ensemble member performer. We'll talk a little bit about that. And we're going to talk about a variety of different things, including Cheryl's book. So you should pick it up, Design Beyond Devices. It's going to be soon made into a movie, I think.
Good luck with that. There might be a few too many tables in there.
Right. Yeah, we'll have to edit some of the characters out, but we'll see.
Call me Hollywood.
There we go. And before I jump in with Cheryl, I do want to say again, as I always do, thank you for coming and sharing an hour with us. Also, we have all kinds of shows happening. We have our Wednesday duo show. We have Friday's theater sports, soon to be Saturday theater sports, as well as our current show, which is happening tonight at 7, which is Fact or Fiction, which is storytelling. Are you doing that tonight, Cheryl?
I don't think so, not tonight, but
okay.
I am in April. I have at least one appearance
Right.
on that show.
Yeah, I'm not in it tonight either, but both of us have been in it, so, and are in it. So,
and I did last week. So if you go to the Twitch channel, you can see last week I told one of the real stories.
Awesome, cool. And then obviously we have this show as well. We're doing online classes. We're into our quarter, but we also have some specialty classes that are coming up. And as always, if you want to donate, you can do all of this, find out about all this stuff through unexpectedproductions.org. So there we go. That's the plug. And I'll probably do it again at the end. But right now I want to jump into our conversation because as I was saying before we went on, I think I could do, I don't know, 3 or 4 of these with you and still not run out of ideas. So it's great. And thank you for the book. And I have a signed copy, by the way, just saying.
There are too many of those out there. It's a little hard because book signings aren't a thing in COVID.
That's right. So if you want to buy it on eBay, it's there. So no, I'm only kidding. I'm not giving it up. Anyway, but what an interesting idea. And I want to get back to the book, but as I start all of these, I tend to start with like, how did you find improv? And also then, since you're in UP, how did Unexpected Productions happen to you?
Sure. So, in high school, I did theater, like scripted theater musicals. I went to this huge high school. It was Pennsbury School District in Pennsylvania, like 900 people in my graduating class. So the theater was kind of demoralizing because there was still only like one show, and so it's a little hard to get parts. And so I had more success in forensics, which is not crime. It's speech and debate. But in particular, I did extemporaneous speaking, which is it sounds like a nightmare. So you go to like a school on a weekend and they give you a current events topic. You have half an hour to research in magazines before the internet about this topic, and then give from memory a 7-minute speech about it. And so that was and in the end you're kind of going off the cuff there. That was probably my first improvisation of something. It wasn't like fun improv, but it was something. And same with like a student congress where you were kind of working off of knowledge of current events and speaking off the cuff. I got to college, and so I gave up theater because that was an uphill battle. And like the senior year play they chose was Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. Like, okay, so you've got like one basically speaking female part for like 900 students and then a bunch of prostitutes. Cool, I'm out. We're done with that. But when I got to college, I ended up going to Carnegie Mellon University. I was not in their drama program, obviously. I was in their computer science program. But they have a really good theater program there, or a student-run theater program there called Scotch and Soda Theater. And I got really involved with them really early on. I was on board. I was running their website basically from the moment I got there, and there was a show I kept seeing people do scenes from, in speech and debate, in dramatic interpretation, complete works of William Shakespeare abridged. I always wanted to do that show. Only dudes, right? Like, did not think that there were never any lady parts, except that year when I was a freshman, somebody was doing a version that they had rewritten, or like, recast the roles. So there was going to be a female, there was going to be 4-person, and there was going to be a female slot. I'm like, I'm going to audition for that. I'm not going to get in. I'm a freshman. I'm totally going to. I've quit theater. This is not going to happen, but I have to try. And I, against all odds, got cast. And obviously that's scripted, but everybody else in the show was basically in the improv troupe for my theater, for that larger theater organization. And so peer pressured me into auditioning for an improv show called Violators Will Be Towed. And it was like half short form and half a herald. And I had no idea what I was doing. Literally none. Like, they're like, oh, it's like the warm up games we've been doing in rehearsal. I'm like, okay, well, I like hanging out with you folks, and I like theater, and sure, I'll go. And again, this is not gonna, I got cast in the Herald group. So then I got to learn what a Herald was, and that like blew my mind. So long form improv was my first improv love. Like being able to like immerse myself in a character for like the length of a one act play. Like the first time I got completely caught by surprise by something another character was doing. Like we were like sneaking around a pirate ship, and I got like kidnapped or something, and I was just like completely as the character, just shocked. And I was like, this is amazing. Like I'm just as in this as I would have been in a scripted show. And from there, it just kind of, I ended up joining their short form troupe, and it just kind of kept going. Ended up having to give it up for a couple years when I moved out to California to work in video games, because there's 80-hour work weeks, not very compatible with anything else. Then I moved out here, and I actually started improv out here with a show called Saturday Morning Cartoon Show, which was over at one of the other improv houses in Seattle, Jet City Improv, and did shows there for like 18 months on their main stage, doing like long form shows there, until I finally got to do some stuff with Unexpected in Redmond, near where I live. You folks were doing shows with a local theater company, and that's how I first got kind of like my break with UP, and got to work with some of you folks, and that kind of made my way to my audition. And now we are 12, 13 years later,
Yeah.
almost 13 years later now from
Wow.
getting cast. So I'm grateful for this journey.
Yeah. Wow. 13 years. Yeah. I was trying to think of that earlier, like how long you've been in the company. And I do that whenever we talk to UP people about like how long. And for me, it's like everything's so condensed. I'm like, oh, Cheryl's been around, I don't know, 5, 6 years. I don't know.
Right.
So,
And I mean, it's so strange for a theater, like I try to explain to other people, like it's not like a normal theater company, because like people have been there for like 20 and 30 years. Like it's just not this something you get to see every day or be a part of every day.
yeah.
Especially like improv companies like in LA and New York, people just like in and out and in and out and in and out. And here we have this lovely sort of this persistence that lets us build a much stronger ensemble, and like a
Yeah.
family, with all the things that come with a family.
Yeah.
It's been
Well,
it's been a blessing.
and that's, I think, again, for all everyone, including yourself, who creates shows at UP, that's a good sign. Years ago, I remember going to, I think it was a conference on like building audiences or something like that. And I introduced myself as being artistic director of Unexpected Productions. And the person said, oh yeah, that's that company where actors go in and they never come out. And I thought, oh yeah, well, case in point, I guess.
There's worse things than people enjoying it so much that they don't leave. Like I as somebody who's done a lot of community theater, it was always frustrating to work with actors who were just there as like a stepping stone to the next thing, and their mind wasn't really in the moment. And
Right.
that's a thing at a lot of the bigger improv companies out there, and that's not a thing we encounter a lot here. Like people are here because they like the art and they like the craft, and they're here because they want to do the show that they're in, and that's great that we can all grow together.
Right. Cool. Okay. Cool. We'll come back to your art towards the end of this because there is some stuff I want to ask you about that. But I do also want to talk about your book. I feel like this is some sort of TV talk show. Uh,
Ooh, 3D.
there we go. 3D. If you're watching it in 3D, don't get freaked out. And wow, um, reading it, I mean, there was so many things in it that really were amazing. So congratulations on this. And so many ideas. And being an actor improviser, there were a lot of things from the design perspective or device perspective that where I was like, I don't know what's happening. So I'm sure I'll have a lot of follow-up questions after we're done. But one of the things you do is draw a parallel between, not even parallel, intersection between improv and AI or devices. And so rather than talk about, I mean, we can't talk about specific things in the book that I do have questions about. The burning question that I'm dying to ask you, so I'll ask it first, is what do you think technology is missing from improv, and what do you think improv is missing from technology? Because it struck me that there's a lot of talk about the design aspect of it, and sort of everything has to be sort of thought out, premeditated, put into technology, and all that's put into us through our life experience that we then bring to improv. But I was just trying to, so that's my question, is what is technology missing that improv has, and what is improv missing that technology has?
It's a very interesting question. Thank you. And for context, for people who don't know me, when I'm not improvising,
Oh, okay.
I'm a user experience designer, trained in computer science. And so I've worked at places like Microsoft and Amazon. I worked on Alexa and Cortana, and I used to work in video games, like Electronic Arts on like the Sims games. And so I have this, unique path through technology, which led to this book about, about the way I describe it to people who are not in technology is I wanted the book to be the manual for people who wanted to design the bridge, the experience of the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. Like they move back and forth seamlessly between like physical controls and touch screens and like holograms and talking to a computer, and they don't have to think about it; they just do it. But there's a ton of design work that has to happen to make that seamless for the human, and that's a kind of the book is hopefully the next step towards that. And there's a nod to Captain Picard on the cover also. So there, I to answer your question, uh, and this is a lot of kind of why my chapter 2 in the book exists about improv. But what technology is missing that improv can provide is the curiosity about context and like the humility of like there's more like that our scene partners or our customers or the other people out there can provide that we don't know. Like a lot of times somebody with a startup founder comes in and is like, I have a solution and it's going to solve everyone's problems and I am great. And they come in and they don't even ask the question like, am I solving a real problem? What are the actual like systems that I'm influencing? Like who could I be harming when I put the solution into the marketplace?
Right.
Like there's no curiosity about that context. There's no looking around at your sort of scene partners in the market, both the ones who are purchasing your product and the other people in the scene, and that harms people. It's let's take the platform we're on right now. There wasn't a lot of, hey, how might it harm people if our political ads are misused? It's not just about the person purchasing the ads, it's people who are in influenced by the governments that are affected by those ads. And what improv gives us is frameworks for exploration, for curiosity, for understanding other people and how like people tick and how sort of character works, and how environments work. And environments, like, we study in improv, we study like how to represent environments. It's super important when you're doing things like voice design, because the whole reason you do voice design is because typing at a keyboard is no longer reasonable for some reason. Like maybe your hands are full, or maybe you're moving between rooms, or you're driving a car, and so like you need to be curious about your environment, and that's another thing that improvisers are trained to explore. So that curiosity, at its most fundamental level, is something that uh, a lot of technologists don't bring to the table. They come in trying to solve problems instead of asking about what, like, are they solving the right problem in the first place. And then once they have a solution, they don't ask, like, what is the broad scope of the impact of this thing? Like, they're just like, I can solve this, so I will. They don't ask the Ian Malcolm question from Jurassic Park. Should I be solving this? Like, should the scientists be solving the problem with the dinosaurs? No, they maybe not, maybe not. And then the flip side of your question, what is improv missing from technology? Well, I'm biased because I am an experienced designer. But one thing that pains me watching the impact of the pandemic is how hard it is for all of the small theaters to navigate digital theater experiences for their audiences. Like I'm an experienced designer, and I'm helping UP try to navigate that, as like my new role of like artistic associate of digital productions or whatever. But that's like experienced design, and that's like I'm trained to do that, and that's a expensive consulting thing that like a lot of theaters wouldn't be able to afford. And I wish that like and the things that like our marketing director had to figure out even before I had time to like help, like you have to connect Eventbrite to Zapier so that it'll update those two things, and then it'll give people an email to a Zoom link, and then like that's complicated, and no one got in the arts to do that. Like and so it's not that like tech's offering these things, but there needs to be some kind of glue, that like improv and theater and the arts, like to like there's a lot of good that technology can offer, to increase the reach and the durability of the arts. But there's this like experience glue that is not there, and I don't, whether it's like product or whether it's like more affordable consulting services on like a more volunteer basis or something like that. It sucks that like like small theaters in the middle of this stressful time are having to navigate what the heck is Zapier and why do I care? Like I didn't know what Zapier was before Kent started talking about it. And
Right.
those things are non-trivial. Uh, and then I think there's also some really interesting things about like interacting with audiences at scale. Like I've done Twitch RPGs, like role playing games where you're an actor playing a game for a large audience, and the audience can interact with you sort of in an asymmetric way. Like they can donate to influence the narrative and things like that. So instead of ticket money, it's like they're paying to influence the narrative, and like there's all kinds of interesting stuff that can happen there. So I think the things that improv is maybe missing from technology is the like technology needs to give us a little bit of assistance smoothing things out, and I think there's a ton of opportunity in expanding our reach and new forms of storytelling, that don't necessarily require new types of like hardware. Like I'm not saying we have to go into VR. It's just like how do we adapt our narratives to use what we already the technology that we're already on like right now.
Right. So I want to come back to the book here in a second, but follow up on that topic. It sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you just see this as the way forward, that theaters are going to have to, and who knows, dance, music are going to have to somehow pursue this technology side of things, going forward. Because as you and I were talking beforehand, is this going to be the last pandemic? Right. And so what do we do? And do we need to have that stuff in place going forward? So do you see it as a area of, well, and again, I'm putting thoughts in what I'm hearing from you. It sounds like there are lots of areas of promise, from your point of view.
Yes. I mean, I work for a very large foundation that many people may have heard of, and we generally are of the opinion that like this is not a one-off thing. And certainly if you've watched the news, like there's all these variants. Like even if we get inoculated against COVID right now, there's new variants, and just like the flu adapts. And so, and the thing, and this is me talking, not my employer, not anybody else, but like now that governments have figured out how to do lockdowns and how to put these policies in place, I think it's going to be more common that when something comes out with a high enough rate of like transmissibility and fatality or sickness, like we're going to see this happen again. It doesn't have to be COVID. It might be a COVID variant. It might be a really bad flu. But like, hopefully it won't be a year-long closure because we'll have better ways of dealing with these things. But uh, like resilience is a real asset moving forward.
Right.
And so I do think that there's certainly going to be theaters that spring up with the old model and do well until the next big event, and then they will be tested again, and hopefully they will survive. Nobody wants to see anything fail, but there will also be organizations that diversify, and that helps you weather the storm.
Right.
um, the more local an organization is, I think, like the less the big technology play pays off. Like UP is interesting, and we were talking about this because your work has you've made so many connections in the global community, that there's people who are interested in your work in Europe and in Asia. And so like, hey, if we did a 1 p.m. show, there might be people who would watch it in other time zones. And some of our cast members have done shows that have been exposed to other people in time zones. So like, hey, maybe that's worth us experimenting. A smaller theater, maybe you don't want to invest in a multi-cam theater like system right away to broadcast your shows. But even just smoothing the process for getting people digital ticketing, so that you don't have to sanitize as many surfaces in your lobby is a worthwhile expenditure, right? Like I'm, as somebody who works on office productivity, I'm like, is anyone ever going to want to touch a whiteboard marker again? Like there's just things that like things that we take for granted that we aren't even thinking about that are going to be super weird once everybody shows up, even if we're all inoculated, because we're just going to think it's gross.
Right.
And theaters in particular, it's because we're not coworkers. We are all strangers. We're all showing up, and there's laughing, and it's boisterous, and there's food and drink. And so yeah, technology might help us with that too.
That's great. And while we're there, I have a couple more questions about the book. I just want to publicly thank you for all you've done for UP as part of this process. It's really helped. And being someone who is just a dinosaur with all the stuff, it's been great. So thank you very much for all you're doing. So one aspect of the book I really want to talk about, because I really loved it, was you bring in storytelling as part of the process, which is probably where we'll talk about since we're both storytellers. But I also love that that notion of, is it body storming, where the the physical person in an environment should be considered as part of the design process. And I'm sure that's probably, oh, if I had a nickel for every time somebody in design did that. But for me, it was like totally like, of course. But I hadn't really thought about it. The idea of just, wow, how do we physically interact with these devices and these things? And where it made me come back to was, or where it's most active for me right now, is like cars. And so, I can bark orders in my car or whatever. And but I love that you included that as part of the design process and the dialogue, because I think storytelling is super important, and I think oftentimes it's not considered enough. And also this physical aspect, because most people think of technology as being some kind of intellectual, Alexa, do this kind of thing, rather than what am I doing in the space and what is the technology taking from me, my physical cues. And you also pull in a lot of stuff about like leveling the playing field with like disabilities, and how do we take that into account, and all that stuff to me is really just insightful and and fantastic. So do you think, I guess, as a designer, that you start with the idea of like, what do I want to design? Or do you start with this idea of like, gee, I'm sitting here in my office, gee, I wish I could do this. And then that's where the idea for the design comes from. Or do you get the idea of, oh, we should have a device that does this, and then let's play with it. If that makes sense.
It can go a lot of different ways. And because, in reality, in like practical reality, designers exist in all levels of a company. Like you might end up like just being sort of assigned a problem to solve, or you might be lucky enough to be sort of asked to do a blue sky design exploration, or maybe you're an independent person trying to write. Like when I had designed an Alexa skill a couple of years ago called Countdown. I've since taken it down because I didn't want to maintain it, but it was my goddaughters were trying to count down the days until a vacation that we were taking them on to Disney World, and we wanted to put the burden on Alexa instead of their mom. So how could we teach Alexa to do that? Because she knew how to do things like count down the days till Christmas, but not like a day that was important to an individual. So sometimes like a problem just surfaces itself. Those situations when the problems surface themselves in a local environment, like your personal environment, that's where the thing I was talking about before, like the curiosity, the like, is this just me? Like, are there other people? Like, is this really a general problem? Is it a problem worth solving and putting human capital on? Like
Right.
that one, it was just me. And so it wasn't like I'm affecting a bunch of huge systems, but like if I'm building a Facebook around that, am I excluding people? What are the bigger problems? You have to be careful when problems like that come up. A product I worked on that Amazon had in the market for a couple of years, the Echo Look, which was a fashion camera that had Alexa enabled, didn't it started with a general interest in using new technology for fashion uses. Like it was we were in a lab that was sponsored by Amazon Fashion. This was like, what do we've got all this technology, what do you do? And so there's just a general hypothesis that like there's people out there who have a lot of clothes and might have some trouble managing those clothes, like at some point. So we just, there's a technique in design called ethnographic research where you go and you observe people in their environments. And we just ask them to show us how they made decisions about clothes and ask them to show us where they kept their clothes and walk us through that process. Internally, we had some ideas about what we wanted to do, but we didn't want to like tell them what the ideas were because then we'd ruin they would tell us what we wanted to hear. So, sometimes you go in and you're like, let's go see if there's a problem or an opportunity. And what actually happened was there was more opportunity than we thought. Like we had an idea. We're like, oh, people maybe have a lot of clothes. And we were like, oh, wow, yeah, people are keeping their clothes in 3 or 4 rooms. Their apartments are like, the closets are too tiny. They can never see all their stuff at the same time. And they don't have like a full length mirror they trust. And so like they have multiple problems that we can help them with. We didn't see all those things, and we wouldn't have if we came in and just said like, do you want a thing that helps you manage your clothes? We came in and asked them a more general question. And there's a lot of, when it comes to the disability stuff, there's a lot of opportunity out there. But there's a there's a lot of tension, especially right now, because there's designers are getting better, but the real desire is to have disabled people like on design teams or like a regular part of the design process. Because a lot of times it's like disabled people are like the just sort of token, like they brought in the beginning and the end. Um, and they live their lives like they know what the context is, right? It's like you could spend all this time coming up with theories, or this person who's an expert can come in. um, why not just pull the audience member in if you want a real audience member's perspective in a scene? So instead of just trying to pretend what the audience member might say or do. So that's, there's a tension there. Some folks are like, what might somebody who's got a vision disability run into? But it's much more effective to just go out and ask someone.
Right. And do you find that that has been kind of a new idea, versus people trying to like, oh well, somebody can't see, they'll be able to do this, and you or I mean, like in the last few years, the idea of like bringing people in or asking people or looking at that, because to me, um, a lot of the stuff around the disability issue in the book struck me as, wow, there's so many illnesses, conditions that can benefit from design in terms of how people interact with technology. You know, I mean, I've seen it firsthand with family members and things like that who've been sick and go, wow, you know, 30 years ago, this wouldn't exist, that you couldn't do this. So do you see it as a kind of a new idea, or has it kind of been along you know, the whole time?
It's a really interesting question because, and I think, you know, I'm going to bring a particularly American perspective to it because that's where we are, and that's kind of, you know,
Mhm.
I'm designing an American context. But you know, the Americans with Disabilities Act came out in the mid '90s, and that was very much written for physical places. You know, that's why we've got railings in bathrooms, so in like disabled stalls and things like that, because it was required. And some buildings don't have those things because they were built before the Americans with Disabilities Act. That act was before the internet, so it doesn't explicitly call out digital affordances. It doesn't say that you don't have to do them. It's vague. And so the early internet and digital pioneers could sidestep. They're like, well, it doesn't say we have to do anything, and we are moving fast. And there's plenty of people we can address who are not disabled. So we're just going to focus on that and we'll deal with the other problem later.
Mhm.
Problem is when you engineer systems and you don't like focus on like really fundamentally changing things like, oh, the fact that somebody who's blind might need to access your site at some point, it's really hard to change later. So and you end up with this like critical mass of technology that you're competing with that doesn't have these affordances. And then the new software comes in, it's gonna be more expensive to make those affordances in there. So then you needed this like critical mass of like advocacy of enough people to band together and say like, this is crap. And either you know, get lawyers involved or just speak with wallets to encourage different companies to um, change their policies. In recent years, one thing that's made a big difference is the U.S. government requiring companies that deal with them to have their websites be accessible. So Microsoft and Google, they have, if they want government contracts, they have to have compliant websites. It's just the law, and that's made a huge difference. But that's, you know, it's still pretty, you know, it's definitely after the dot-com bust, so it's really only just in the last like 10 years that that's really picked up steam. And that's still like mainstream disabilities, like people, you hear a lot about people with vision disabilities and like deafness, but you know, like physical physical disabilities, there's a wider range. And so like it's maybe not as common to think about that, like what if you can't use your hands and you need to navigate, like you're quadriplegic or something. And so that, you know, is even newer still. But we're getting there. Like Xbox has the very cool adaptive controller project where you know, a disabled person can build the controller they need for their very specific set of disabilities, whether it's big pads or it's like sticks or it's like zip and pop controllers or whatever they need, so they can play games without using the standard controller. But that's very recent, that like to go out into the community that much and let the community lead to that point. Before you'd just be like, well, um, you know, we'll come up with a controller that hits like 80% of the other disabled people instead of like really going out and letting people work
Right.
with you.
Cool. We've only hit a couple of topics in this. And again, as David said in the chat, it's a great book. I would highly recommend it. And again, I'm a tech non-entity, and I enjoyed it. It was really great. I will say as a disclaimer, it's not a grab a cup of cocoa and get in bed read. I mean, maybe not for me, but it was really awesome. And like I said, I have a lot more questions about it, so we'll come back to it. But we have a couple of other topics I'd really like to talk about, and kind of picking up a little bit from where we were. We won't go into the specifics, but you've had a lot of health issues over the last few years. And I'm curious to talk to you as an improviser and a storyteller about sort of the metaphorical side of that and what that journey has been for you in terms of going through all these, you know, it seems like, you know, one thing after another. and like you can't get a break. And it's sort of like, well, what, we were talking earlier about just like, nature and whatnot. It's sort of like, what's the offer there as an improviser? What's the thing to yes and what is the stuff that you've discovered? Because I'm fascinated by the idea of narrative medicine and the idea of using storytelling as a way of accessing people and finding a way through illness. And so I'm just curious for you, like what, like off the top of your head, don't overthink it. Like, what are like the three things or however many things that you feel like, wow, I really discovered this in the last few years through health issues or going through them.
Well, and I'll preface this with a couple things. Might get emotional. And number two, I don't want anyone to like look at like the amount of things I've done and like feel bad or like, everybody's journey's different. Everybody's like path is different. Yes, I've had a lot, I had my ninth surgery on Sunday and it was a surprise. So major abdominal surgery, just boop. So it's been a lot. Finally got I've got several disabilities, got new diagnosis last year, and a lot of them come with chronic pain. And for a long time, there was no explanation for some of the pain. Some of it was like, tumors and things that turned out to be benign, but like really excruciating stuff. And you just have to wake up every day and you're in pain. And there's no, uh, there's all these. First, I learned that like your your existence challenges other people's storytelling, like your existence challenges their like happy go lucky going through life, that like good like good things happen to good people, or that like their mortality is not at risk, or it think like you're running around in 35 and you're like talking hysterectomies and like and ovarian tumors, and they're like what is, and like people will distance themselves. And it took me a long time to come to terms with like the fact that that was their storytelling kind of going haywire and wasn't really about me, but it hurt. Like that was very difficult. And it happens all the time. Like it's a cycle, right? Every time things get worse, that happens a little bit more. Um, One very personal thing for me was like, why keep going? Like what, and that's the thing that a lot of people with chronic illness struggle with. Like, what is the reason for getting out of bed the next day when the pain is still there? And for me, and I don't want to I don't want to tell anybody what the answer is for them, because pain is different, circumstances are different. um for me it was kind of like um it was like a momentum and spite thing. It was like, okay, well, if I have to get out of bed the next day, I need to find some reason, like something to do that is so awesome that it retroactively explains the amount of pain I was like went through, like retroactively makes the hero's journey worth it. And so, I start doing these, you look back at it and you're like, oh, you start your own company, like in the same year that you had two, like two major surgeries and loss, like a hysterectomy and all this stuff. And you're like, yeah, because I needed a reason to keep going. Like I was teaching, and so I just kept teaching workshops to other people and like trying to have an impact and make it all make sense for me. And be, it was just like, okay, fine, I'm just going to be more awesome so that the pain makes sense for me. Also, like it's a distraction. 'Cause people are like, why? At this point in my life, I'm very, very bad at relaxing, because then you just at peace with like your body, and then you just feel the pain. So I'm like, feel like, why are you doing that? Why do you do so many things? I'm like, because trust me, I don't want to be still with this. So, other people like tell themselves a story about me and they're like, wow, she's just like this warrior woman, she does all these things. And like, really for me it's like survival. It's not out of like I am Wonder Woman running around with my sword. It's like that's really the only way I can like get up and still breathe, is to do the things in the way that I've been doing them. But that whole like, I guess I have to do something more awesome because it hurts more, and that's the only way it's going to make sense to me. Sometimes it's not in your control, and sometimes it hurts so badly that you can't, and you're just in an ambulance like I was on Sunday. But that, you know, I and sometimes I thought about writing about that, but then I also felt like I don't want to be like held up as like a motivational poster that makes other people who are chronically ill feel like they're not doing enough, because it's so complicated, and there's so many different types of chronic illness, and it can affect so many different parts of you. Like I happen to have chronic illness that I can still be productive. Some people do not, and so it's different people are going to cope in different ways.
Right. So, uh, so it's, I mean, in a way, what I'm hearing is this living moment to moment, in response to whatever's happening in your body or how you're feeling, your state of being. And then that sort of is a causation for all this other stuff. And do you think some of the things that you've accomplished, I mean, maybe even the book and stuff like that, do you think those are directions and things you would have done anyway? Or do you think that in some way, working through all this pain and illness and surgeries and whatnot led you to these directions that you wouldn't have gone down?
I mean, it's a complicated question, and when you look back at it, you ask yourself, if I had a magic wand and I could remove the thing, would I remove the thing? And I honestly don't think I could remove the thing and end up with the book the way it is. Like I think that my perspective and my curiosity is fundamentally shaped by the journey. Like I wasn't as curious about the disabled perspective until I started going through like my journey at like 26, and things just started malfunctioning, and seeing the other side of being functional at an early age. And it's just, I mean, it I mean, like maybe we could have tamped down the severity a little bit, but um, I feel like it did push me towards some of these outcomes and like the scope of the outcomes.
Right.
You just keep like, like a heightened sense of mortality, just it does heighten your drive, because you never know like what's the end point. Like so many times, like I've worked on my will a couple times. Like some of these surgeries, we didn't know if these things were malignant. We didn't, so you work as if you're like, okay, maybe this year is the one, maybe this set of workshops, maybe this book, maybe this thing is the last set of things. So what do I want that to be? What is that last set of, what does that work mean? Like what is, and then you can get into spirituality and like, what do you believe? Is there something else, or is it just your impact on the earth? And I'm a pragmatist, so I'm like, I believe there's something else, but in case there isn't, what impact do you want to leave on the earth, on the other people? Like what, if you had to go through all this freaking pain, at least like hopefully the shape you left on the earth was you left it better than you came in, so the pain had meaning.
Right. And we talked a little bit beforehand, just sort of about that aspect of life and meaning and things like that. So do you feel like you've picked more of that up, uh, as you've gone through this journey in terms of, yeah, now whether it helps or not, I have this, or whether it helps or not, I believe in this, or whether, you know, um, I mean, ha- have you gone down, has your path changed, because of that?
I would say that's an understatement. And it's been a long road, like when I shattered my kneecap, like dark night of the soul, like felt like there was nothing out there. Like it didn't make any sense. It was, I thought I was never going to act again. I thought I was never going to walk again. Like it was like so incredibly painful and crippling, and like couldn't straighten my leg. And it just, and I'm not going to get into the damage of my youth as being raised Catholic during certain scandals, being adjacent to some of those things. Like, I've moved away from organized religion, but
Mhm.
I would say that in the last year or two, in particular, I've had like some spiritual awakenings, and my beliefs have evolved, and I have found comfort in my new beliefs and practices.
Right.
Uh,
And
and yeah, I believe there's everything is connected, and there's far more than what we see.
okay. And not to equate improv with all this, but what is the role that improv has uh, played in your development during the course of these different various health challenges?
Well, I mean, part of it's that the creativity, right? The like, what is the way I'm going to yes and this terrible thing that has just happened to me? Or the ability to envision myself doing the next thing. Whether, whether that's so in some ways it was like preparing me to like literally do the next thing. Like when I shattered my kneecap, I auditioned for a musical 2 weeks later that was being produced at Unexpected Productions and got cast in it. That was one of the most absurd things I've ever done. Is like hobbled into a musical audition with the Bledsoe brace on my knee, like holding my musical stuff in one arm. Like, I still bless everyone. Like that show meant so much to me, and it gave me something to work through.
Right.
But and then there's the more abstract like, okay, what can we do here? Like, what how can I see myself? Like, how what opportunities do I have at my disposal? I think like one thing we don't talk about a lot is managing perspectives and perceptions while chronically ill. I talked about it a little bit just now, like seeing things from other like friends' perspectives, but when you work as a chronically ill person, managing the perceptions of your workmates and your managers is a real thing. And you know, I first encountered this when I was in video games because that was when I first had my like first ovarian tumors, and I didn't know what was going on. I like realized it hurt to breathe, and I showed up at a doctor, and they're like, "How are you walking?" I'm like, "Oh, cool, cool. I'm having surgery next week. That's fine." But like in retrospect, like people thought that I was hard to approach, and what was actually happening was my face was showing pain, like that I thought was just normal, like woman pain. It was actually like horrifying, not supposed to happen pain. But you know, there's stories that are being told. There's like what's going on with me, and there's what other people are telling themselves about like my face from being in pain is me saying I don't like them coming into my office. I'm like, oh, okay, okay. And this a blessing and a curse of being an expressive actor is like people are like, oh, it's great, you could just hide everything. Like, no, that's the whole thing about being expressive is that it expresses things. Like, especially managers I've been with several years, like I could just have like a fleeting thought and they'd be like, what are you upset about? I'm like, I wasn't even fully upset yet. How did you know that? So like I've worked a lot about like thinking about other people's perspectives in my workplace, like what might they be seeing, like knowing when my pain is bad enough that I need to remove myself from the equation because the stories they're going to tell themselves about my behavior is going to be detrimental to my career or to our relationship. Also like working like maintaining the relationship state with the manager, like how much and when I tell them about things, and like how we build the trust about how I communicate, because usually my manager gets a little bit more of the story so that we can plan my career around what is happening to me. And that's I feel like a lot of people who aren't in improv and aren't managing like that relationship part of crow and like the objective part of crow aren't necessarily, or like crow in general, aren't necessarily used to asking themselves those questions about other people and maintaining that state about other people in their heads.
Right.
And it's really important, and it super stresses people with chronic illness out. And it can have a huge impact on your success
Right.
at an employer or in a social environment or whatever.
Right. And that goes back to something that struck me when you said it. I hadn't really thought that much about, or you put it more succinctly, I guess, which was that the intersection of the stories. My story intersects your story, and your story intersects other people's story. And what is that impact? Because most of us go through life thinking, well, we're the hero of the story because it's our lives. But how those epic tales interact is really interesting and food for thought. Um, and
And
then,
and especially like as things have gotten really absurd for me this last year, because like I've had 3 surgeries in the last 9 months, and I have another one in like 6 weeks. I've come to realize that like people have just now just started looking at me like just actual Wonder Woman, which is frustrating to me because they start to tell themselves that I don't need help, that I've got this. that I'm sort of superhuman. And the fact is that past experience does not indicate future performance. And it's actually kind of the opposite. The more shit we go through as chronically ill people, the more we need help. Like every surgery is riskier. Like we get older, our bodies are more likely to fail, our pain becomes greater. But people tell themselves, because this is some kind of superhero story, that I'm getting stronger. I can take on anything. I'm like, no, that's not actually how this works. I'm being beaten into like just dust by all of this. And so that, the gap, the narrative gap is becoming quite vast recently, and
Right.
it's and I'm really it's really wearing on me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I can imagine. I mean, not only going through the process, but it's also, I mean, so many of us take our aspect of life for granted, thinking, oh, it's going to go on forever and blah, blah, blah. And here you are constantly, in a way, or, a few times a year being confronted with this idea of
It's
like,
pretty
wow,
constant this season.
yeah. And that perspective definitely is different than I think what most people um, go through, and it's funny because I've had lots of conversations with people recently, for some reason, about these kinds of things where it's like, confronting or facing uh, death, the end of life, versus not even kind of being aware of it, or not, taking it for granted, I guess is probably the better way to put it. But um, yeah. And, I want to spend our last few minutes talking about something else. But again, I also want to echo that, having been someone who's followed your health journey as well, I do think it's pretty amazing. Um, you know, and I have not felt any negativity, any why me. It's just stuff that you seem to be going through. That's just my personal opinion, and it's admirable. So hopefully good health is what I'm
Don't buy a lottery ticket on that.
we're wrapping up our time. We have a few more minutes left. And what I wanted to finish on, because we talked about you as a designer and an author, we talked about the health stuff, but I'm just curious, after all these years of exploring the future of your art, like what do you want to do as an artist, as an actress, as an improviser, as a writer, perhaps? um what are directions and impulses that you're having now, like, gee, once I get through this, maybe I can go do that, and whether it's types of shows or ideas you have around exploring long form. You've done a lot of various things, from plays to creating shows to doing a lot of the stuff online. So I'm just really interested in hearing kind of what, where do you want to go with the
Well,
art?
there's some things that I think are longer term plays. Like I'd love to get deeper into voiceover. I've shipped a couple of things, but never gone too deeply. But that's kind of in a box. I feel called to do something with the digital format, like actually artistically shows. It would require having less than one surgery every 2 months, so that's been a little bit difficult. But there's one of I had a lot of fun back in my Jet City days. Like the second show we did was something called Reality World, where like the
Mhm.
audience was like voting off players, and like there was this whole like that was kind of like a serial embedded in a single show.
Right.
Um, but I think there's something to that over the course of a multiple week run, especially like I'm interested in making sustainable online theater that's not just it's not just free on Twitch, but something that incorporates narrative with giving the audience
Mhm.
control, and helps them shape the show that they're seeing, because that's what suggestions are, is people shaping the show that they're seeing, and giving people different abilities to do that. So serials that where people can like kind of either by voting or donating or something influence the narrative over this course of several weeks.
Right.
Shows that experiment with like asymmetric interactions, so large groups of people having influence together, although we haven't quite hit the audience numbers to make that interesting. It was something we flirted with when we were doing those RPGs back in the day, where people would sort of band together in groups and try to influence the narrative. So those are things that I'm interested in finding playing with at some point. I do like it's not so much like artistic in the sense of a show, but just like I think it helps raise the tide for all of our ships, like smoothing the digital experience for everybody is still a big like important thing for me right now. I feel kind of it's weird. So I have I still have a bunch of TikTok, like 35,000 TikTok followers or something. So I'm still a little mad at TikTok because like my profile's broken. That's a whole other thing. But like interacting with that community and like teaching design and talking about some of these creative approaches to things has been pretty fulfilling. But with writing, I do feel like I get a lot of people asking me to write a personal book. I still feel weird about that. Like, I don't know, memoir or something, but I don't feel like I'm that person yet. But that might be someday. And there are a couple of more design books like percolating in the back of my head, but I really want to focus on this one for like, I don't want to move to the next thing. Like, there's a lot of important ideas in here that I need to get off the ground before I can do that. There's concepts I have to teach and spread, and that's going to take a while. It's probably going to take a year or two to get that out into the community because it's a big book. To my publisher's chagrin, they're like, "Yeah, 225 pages." I'm like, "Hi, here's like 400." Hi. Yeah, it's what happens when you put someone who's got like that it's sense of mortality near a writing app. You're like, bleh.
So a follow-up to the performance aspect, and especially the online interactive performance stuff. So there's that component where the audience can, you know, vote or have influence over the story. That aspect. What is the use of that from an audience perspective? So like what, like oftentimes when I'm creating stuff, I kind of go, well, what do I want the audience to feel or walk out with? And then I kind of start from there. So, if I come to your show and am interacting with you through all these various amazing forms, what do you think that impact will be on me after it's all over? Or what's maybe the goal?
It's a great question, and so my first job was working on Sims games, or like maybe not exactly my first job. My first job was as a Muppet. That's a different story. But one of my first jobs, my first full time job, was working on Sims games. And you know, did people a lot of times people weren't playing that game for the game aspect. They were playing it for self expression. And I feel like you can go and watch Netflix. Those are not interactive experiences, and there is more to watch there than the length of any human life. So why are people coming to an improv show? Why are people coming to Twitch at all? It is because of the interactivity. It is because people want to feel like they existed in the moment, that they had a shared experience with others like we do. It's why people come to the theater, and why the laughter is so so cathartic. And for some people, not everybody, but the same people who like shared their sim stories online, and were really the storytellers, they want to feel like they had an impact on the world. Like, not all of us have a platform, not all of us have can just like hop on Zoom and have people watch us. And these experiences can give people that, and it's satisfying. Like, and I've been on the other side of it, where you comment and on a Twitch show, or you donate, and like stuff changes, and like the TV's talking back at you. The story moves in a different direction. You're like, that's something. I mean, it's one thing to have like a click through interactive Netflix experience, but it's another thing to have the actors like genuinely make different choices because you existed and you showed up in the audience and you made a choice. And it's visceral. Weirdly, it's like visceral in a different way than live theater is, because like we perceive like I think, and this is me talking, like I don't have psych research on this or anything, but we see
Mhm.
the T as such a like a magical fixed element. Like we've it's been fixed media our whole life. To be able to like influence it like seems like sorcery. uh like it did the first couple of times I saw that stuff happen on Twitch, and I think that feels the same way for a lot of folks. Maybe it won't in 20 years to people who are used to it, but right
Right.
now, especially, it can.
Yeah.
And you know, as we kind of talked about before, some people are never going to be able to go to a live improv experience at all because it's, you know, they're immunocompromised or it's inaccessible or social anxiety. And so for them, this is just giving them a comparable experience where they can have that influence on a live experience. So it's a couple of those things. Some people just want that kind of magical, the TV talks back because you existed. Some people can't get it any other way. Some people want the shared magical. It's why we watch sports, right? We want that shared visceral in the moment you had to be there
Right.
cultural thing.
No, I think that's great. And in fact, I remember one time having a conversation with my son, who's now 20, um, and asking him because he really didn't want to watch movies. And I said, well, what's, like they're movies. Did you want to watch movies? And he said, I don't like watching movies because I can't interact with them. And so I think you're onto something there in terms of, having the influence of the audience over that. And yeah, we'll sort of see where it goes. And I also find it funny uh, that in improv, there's such this movement to get away from audience interaction. Like, let's just do our show. And to me, it's
I'm
like,
like, come here.
right. Well, based on what you're saying, I'm going, well, that's what more of that. We need to do even more of that in our live shows, let alone our online shows. So, I mean, maybe improv's finally kind of coming into its own light if we can embrace it, because I feel like it's not, that interaction's not been embraced or emphasized over the last few years. So.
And it's interesting because, like, and I know we're a little bit over time, but like
Yep.
live theater is tough because the way the audience interacts with you is the same way that you're interacting with them. So like they can compete with you on the channel, like talking
Right.
about multimodality, like that, which is kind of the topic of the book, right? You're
Right.
on the same modality, and so they yell back at you, and you can't perform because you're performing. But on Twitch, the performers maintain control of the modality of performance, right? Like the chat is not the modality of performance, and so you can encourage more interaction without like negatively impacting the performance. And so you can get larger scale interaction that is really reasonable to ever get in a live theater or like sane to ask for in a live theater. So I totally get, like, sometimes you're like, I don't want to rile up that audience. I'm the same way. Like sometimes you're emceeing an theater sports show and you're like, we gotta step back. But when it's chat, I mean, and community managers are a huge part of a Twitch show being welcoming and functioning properly. And we've just launched our community manager program, so shout out to John and William and David for coming with us on that journey. But they help keep that part of the experience functioning, but they don't have to do it on the audio channel, so the performance can still go. And so that sort of difference in modalities makes a big difference.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And everything you said's true. And thank you to those guys for maintaining that, because it's really helpful as well. So we are a few minutes over, so I'll end by doing the 3D version of Cheryl's book again.
Woo!
There you go. Design Beyond Devices.
Available on Amazon or on rosenfeldmedia.com.
There we go. And oops, that's my bookmark there. And thank you so much, Cheryl. And there's so much more we could talk about, so maybe we'll have to have you back and talk about this again. Again, if you feel so inspired, want to donate, go to unexpectedproductions.org. If you want to find out about our shows, we do have one tonight at 7 o'clock, Fact or Fiction, which is storytelling based. And tonight's theme is Music in the Air, I believe, is the theme. And we have 3 guest storytellers. I believe they might all be from Canada, but anyway, they're going to be sharing stories on that theme. So check it out tonight at 7. Like I said, we have all of our shows online, so come check those out. Next week, we'll have another one of these. Hopefully, I will be talking to Andrew Heffler, who's a American improviser teacher who's been living, working, and producing improv in Budapest for the last 25 years or so. So hopefully he'll be joining me next week. And in 2 weeks, I'll have Alan Cox, actor, improviser from London. So hopefully you can come check that out. And thank you for spending the last little more than an hour with Cheryl and I. And we'll talk to you soon. So, bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.